Breaking Bad is a story about chaos, but chaos doesn't start with explosions. It starts with decisions. Tiny ones, quiet ones, the kind no one notices until it's too late. Today, we're breaking down the 5 small choices that didn't just change the story, they destroyed everyone in it. Alright, let's start with the very first domino. The moment that didn't just change a scene, it changed the entire trajectory of Breaking Bad. Walt running over the dealers. Now on paper, this moment looks simple. 2 street dealers, 1 desperate Jesse, 1 car. But what actually happened here was a character turning point, because before this moment, Walter White still had rules. He lied, he manipulated, he cooked meth, but he didn't act impulsively. He calculated. Always. And that's why this scene matters. Because for the first time in the entire series, Walter White doesn't calculate, he reacts. When Walt sees Jesse about to get shot, his brain doesn't do what it always does. No plan, no strategy, no chemistry trick, just instinct. And that instinct tells him one thing: act now or lose control forever. So, he floors it, not to scare them, not to warn them, but to kill them. That single decision instantly shatters the balance of power. Up until that moment, Gus tolerated Walt because he was useful, predictable, professional, replaceable. But the second Walt kills those dealers, he stops being an asset and becomes a threat. Now Gus has a problem, because a man who acts without permission is a man who can't be controlled. So Gus does what any empire builder would do. He prepares a replacement. Gale. And that's where the butterfly effect explodes, because Walt realizes something terrifying. If Gale learns the formula, Walt becomes unnecessary. And if Walt becomes unnecessary, Walt becomes disposable. So now Walt faces a choice: wait and die. Or strike first, and that leads directly to Gale's murder, which leads to Gus declaring war, which leads to the cartel collapsing, which leads to Hank investigating, which leads to Hank dying in the desert. All of that destruction, every death, every war, every collapse can be traced back to one moment, one street, one decision, one press of the gas pedal. But here's the detail most viewers miss. Walt didn't run those dealers over because he had to. He did it because deep down, he couldn't stand losing control of Jesse. Jesse wasn't just his partner. Jesse was proof that Walt mattered, that he was powerful, important, necessary. Saving Jesse wasn't strategy. It was ego. And that's why this scene is the true birth of Heisenberg. Not the hat, not the name, not the meth. This moment. Because this is the first time Walter White chooses violence. Without hesitation. This wasn't just a rescue. This was the exact second Walter White stopped reacting to chaos and started creating it.
Run.
Now, if the first domino was Walt choosing violence, the second domino was fate choosing Hank. Because out of everything that could have exposed Heisenberg, it wasn't a raid. It wasn't surveillance. It wasn't a DEA operation. It was a book, and not just any book, a copy of Leaves of Grass, sitting quietly on a bathroom shelf. Here's why this moment is terrifyingly brilliant. For years, Walter White outsmarted everyone. The DEA, Gus Fring, the cartel, even his own family. He built an empire right under Hank's nose. And the whole time, his biggest threat wasn't law enforcement. It was his own ego. Because Walt didn't keep that book for nostalgia, he kept it because he wanted proof. Proof that someone respected him, admired him, understood his genius. Gale's message inside that book wasn't evidence, it was validation. And that's what makes this moment so poetic. Walt didn't get caught because he was careless. He got caught because he was proud. Think about it. Hank had investigated Heisenberg for years. He chased leads, interrogated suspects, risked his life. And none of that exposed Walt. But one quiet bathroom break? That did, because the second Hank opened that book, everything clicked. W. Gale's handwriting. You can literally see the exact second Hank realizes the truth. Not fear, not shock, recognition. That look on his face, that's the moment the hunter realizes he's been having dinner with the prey all along, and from that point on, Walt's empire wasn't falling apart. It was already dead. It just didn't know it yet, because once Hank knew, there was no escape plan smart enough, no lie strong enough, no strategy fast enough to stop what was coming. Walt didn't lose when Hank arrested him. He lost the second Hank opened that book. If the first domino was violence, and the second was discovery, the third was sacrifice. Jesse killing Gale. Because this wasn't just another death in Breaking Bad. This was the exact moment innocence died. Up until this point, Jesse was still human. Yes, he made mistakes. Yes, he sold drugs. Yes, he worked with Walt. But he still had a line, a moral line he hadn't crossed yet, and Walt knew that. That's why, when Gus decided Walt had become replaceable, he didn't threaten him, he replaced him with Gale. Now from a business standpoint, Gus's decision was perfect. Gale was loyal, predictable, professional. Everything Walt wasn't anymore. And once Gale learned the formula, Walt's life expectancy dropped to 0. So Walt did the only thing he could do. He weaponized Jesse. He didn't pull the trigger himself. He didn't poison Gale. He didn't set a trap. He picked up the phone and told Jesse one sentence. It's him or me. That line changed Jesse forever, because in that moment, Jesse realized something horrifying. If he did nothing, Walt would die. And if Walt died, he'd be next. So Jesse made a choice. Not as a criminal, not as a dealer, but as a terrified human being trying to survive. He went to Gale's apartment, knocked, and when Gale opened the door, you can see it. The hesitation, the fear, the last flicker of conscience, that pause. That was Jesse's final chance to walk away. And then he pulled the trigger. That gunshot didn't just kill Gale. It killed the last piece of Jesse's innocence. Because from that point forward, Jesse wasn't just in the game. He was trapped in it. And here's the real tragedy. Walt didn't just save himself that night. He bound Jesse to him forever. Through guilt, through trauma, through blood. Because once someone kills for you, they're never really free from you again. This wasn't Walt winning. This was Walt creating a partner who could never leave him. If the third domino was sacrifice, the fourth was ambition. Walter White declaring war on Gus Fring, because up until this point, Walt wasn't trying to win, he was trying to survive. There's a difference. Survival is quiet, careful, patient. War is loud. And the moment Walt realized Gus saw him as replaceable, something inside him snapped. Not fear, pride. See, Gus made one mistake. He assumed Walt was rational, but Walt stopped being rational the second his ego got involved. Because to Walt, being replaceable was worse than dying. So instead of running, instead of hiding, instead of disappearing with his millions, Walt made a decision no sane criminal would ever make. He chose to fight a man who had more money, more soldiers, more connections, more power. On paper, this wasn't a fight. It was a suicide note. Gus had an empire. Walt had a chemistry set. But here's why this decision changed everything. Walt didn't try to beat Gus with strength. He tried to beat him with weakness, because Walt understood something most people didn't. Empires don't fall from attacks. They fall from pressure points. And Gus had one. Hector Salamanca. Walt realized Gus's greatest strength, his calm, calculated mind, had one fatal flaw. Hatred. Decades of it. The kind of hatred that overrides logic. So Walt built a plan. Not a big plan. Not a loud plan. A precise one. He turned Gus's own obsession into a weapon. And when Gus walked into that nursing home, he thought he was in control. He thought he was untouchable. He thought he'd already won. And then... That explosion didn't just kill Gus Fring, it proved something far more dangerous. Walter White could defeat someone stronger than him, and that realization, that was the real turning point, because once Walt learned he could beat kings, he stopped being afraid of them. Walt didn't destroy Gus because he had to. He destroyed him because he wanted to prove he could. That's when Heisenberg stopped surviving and started conquering. If every disaster had a trigger, if every war had a spark, if every empire had an origin, then all roads lead back to one moment: Walter White's first cook. Because before that day, Walter White wasn't Heisenberg. He wasn't feared. He wasn't powerful. He wasn't dangerous. He was invisible. A man no one noticed. A teacher students mocked. A husband ignored. A genius the world forgot. And then he got diagnosed.
Lung cancer. Inoperable.
Now, most people think that diagnosis created Heisenberg, but it didn't. Cancer didn't change Walt. It revealed him, because the second Walt stepped into that RV and watched the chemicals react, something inside him reacted too. Not fear, not panic, recognition. For the first time in his entire life, Walter White felt alive. That cook wasn't just chemistry. It was identity, because for the first time, he wasn't the man life pushed around. He was the man in control. And that's why the indecision matters more than any murder, more than any explosion, more than any death. Because every single tragedy that followed started right there, inside that RV. Everything traces back to that one decision, and here's the most haunting part. Walt could have said no. He could have walked away. He could have gone home and stayed Mr. White, but he didn't. He stepped inside, closed the door, and chose power. That's the real butterfly effect of Breaking Bad. Not violence, not crime, choice. Because Walter White wasn't dragged into darkness. He walked into it. The most dangerous decision Walt ever made wasn't killing anyone. It was deciding to begin. Breaking Bad teaches us something terrifying. Lives don't collapse because of one big mistake. They collapse because of small decisions we think don't matter. And Walter White, he didn't fall because he was weak. He fell because he chose power. Again and again and again. So now I'm curious. Which decision do you think truly started it all?